Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about the Atari 410 program recorder, but not perhaps the version that we all know and not necessarily love. This is the first model that was released back in 1979. It's known as the 410P. A couple of main differences apart from the obvious cosmetic ones. Take counter is here. There's no pause button, and you've got the carry handle that pops out there. At least two versions of this model were released. One had an internal power supply. The second relied on an external 6-volt DC power supply that would plug in to the side here. I'm guessing that as 400-800 sales took off, Atari began to look at different markets, and it was easier for them just to take the power supply out of the unit, use an external power supply, and that way one model would cover all the different voltages in all the different countries. For example, the main difference between the UK and the US, for example. The model that replaced it, which is the more common one, which we all know, is known as the 410A. There are lots of different theories about why Atari switched from this model, which was made in Japan. One of the ones is that it was a more rugged, more reliable design, the model that replaced it. It may have been down to cost, who knows. But with the new model came a major problem. The new 410s had a stronger amplifier built in, and all of the original software that had been mastered to take into account this model suddenly had lots of issues, because the noise level that this wouldn't have picked up on the recordings suddenly became a huge problem. The noise level was suddenly very much detectable. There were lots of problems with cassettes loading properly, and Atari had to remaster all of their existing catalogue. So every commercial release that they'd made on tape had to be remastered, and it was March 1st 1982 before Atari officially acknowledged that that task had been done. So a change in model, it caused a massive headache for Atari, and the rest is history. Okay, so this unit needs a 6-volt DC supply. It's rated for 300 milliamps. So invariably, if you get these off the likes of eBay, they're going to be missing the power supply. You can actually get a multi-adapter similar to this. Remember, it needs to be DC. Change the voltage, for example, on here to 6 volts. If I can find the other end, then you need to set polarity to positive. So on the various adapters that you'll get, which will come with the power supply, there'll be little arrows that will point in a certain direction. There's an arrow here on the base. Line those up a certain way, it's going to be positive. Line them up a different way, it's going to be negative. Just check with the manual which comes with the power adapter. You're going to struggle probably to get an exact match when it comes to milliamps. So this particular one is rated for 600 milliamps. That's not a problem. It just means that the power supply will not run hot. It's got more than enough power to handle the 410. So this 410 unit hasn't been used for many a year. A common problem with cassette units like this 410 program recorder is that if they're not used regularly, the belts will corrode. They can also slacken. They can develop a kink in them around the pulley area. So we thought we'd give this a go right off the bat with the power supply that we bought for it. So you can see it's rewinding. Doesn't sound very promising. And you can see fast forward sounds a lot better, and the take counter is moving a lot faster. So when we first tried this 410, it looked promising, but unfortunately it wouldn't load any software. So it was a case of taking it apart and finding out what's inside. So you've got 2 screws on the underside which you need to unscrew. Obviously, then you need to lift the bottom upwards, try not to lose the screws. On this model then, with the that relies on an external power supply, you've obviously got all your connecting cables underneath, which you might think is going to make things difficult. It's not, because Atari have carefully thought of this little side panel here, which if it wants to play ball, you pull out like so, and that allows you to lift the bottom piece cleanly away. So on this model then, which is the 410P, just to confirm, without the internal power supply, you can see that we've got two drive belts. One, this one here, is the counter belt. It's a bit loose, but we can see from the previous checks that we did that the counter works fine. This is the main drive belt, which does all of the hard work. So your play function, your rewind, your fast forward, all that is done from this belt here. So looking at this belt, when we did our first tests, obviously rewind was a problem. Play worked, but we couldn't get anything to load. So what we did was we took the belt out. It had a clear kink here in the pulley area. It's obviously loose. We tried the scorched earth method of putting the belt into a mug of boiling water. We left it there for about 15 minutes. This can work. Sometimes it can fail terribly. In our case, it got rid of the kink. It obviously didn't change the fact that this belt is loose, but it allowed us to get the belt in a condition where we can now load software okay. But rewind still doesn't work, it's still a struggle. So we're going to have a go at replacing the belt. Okay, so we changed the drive belt. So you can see that this belt is quite a bit tighter. You can see if we turn here, all three parts are spinning okay. So it's literally a 2-minute job. You just need to make sure that the belt is aligned properly around the spindle here and here. There's a groove which is there. Just make sure it sits in properly. Remember that this part of the belt slides against the spindle here. Should be pretty tight. You can see there's no kinks or deformities in the belt. So now all we're going to do is screw it back together and see if it works better than before. Excuse the sound of the plug running off into the distance. So we've changed the drive belt, we've screwed it back together, we've plugged in the power supply. So let's just have a quick look to see if at least it sounds a bit better. Let's play fast forward. So automatically that sounds stronger. You can actually hear the motor. Let's play rewind. So rewind is a lot stronger. You can see actually the tape counter is now actually turning. So a Newbury error, so if you're new to the Atari 8-bit, is that when you press play, you expect the tape unit to start playing. This function is actually driven by the computer itself. So if you do get an Atari program recorder and the play button doesn't work, then obviously you need to connect it up to your computer first and then actually try and load some cassette software. So don't worry about the fact that the play button, when pressed down, doesn't do anything. That's perfectly normal. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to put in the tape. So we've got the Lone Raider by Atari. We're going to set that up, get it loading, and actually see if it works. Okay, so we're pretty much ready to go. We're going to turn the computer on. I just wanted to point out one of the hazards of filming with a pug nearby. For some reason he started running off with screwdrivers, and this is his latest victim. So I'll deal with him later. Let's get this loaded. So we can see that it's playing okay. We started to load the program. So far so good. Okay, so the 410 dual track So we've got audio whilst the game is loading. You'll have to forgive the wonky camera angle. The pug has now walked over my microphone cable. So we'll come back to this in a second once it's finished loading. So there you go, it's loaded the Lone Raider first time off the bat. Because of the Atari program recorder's dual track nature, it's very hard to actually get a turbo loader which doesn't involve hardware. So you can literally, depending on the length of the tape, you can judge how good in theory a game is going to be. The most graphically intensive games, or the bigger games for want of a better description, you could literally start the cassette unit loading and you could go away, watch an episode of the A-Team or Dallas or whatever, come back and you'd probably still have a few minutes left for the game to load. But the flip side of that is we do get to get some fantastic audio intros at the same time as some software is loading, and you've also got the fantastic Atari conversational language programs, for example, where you can learn Spanish, French, German or Italian. All that kind of stuff is thanks to the dual track setup. So there you go, literally a very cheap, very quick fix to get your Atari 410 back up and running. That's it folks, take care.